So good afternoon, everybody. We've almost come to the end of a very intense 2 days. There's still many of you here, which is not a coincidence because we were clever enough to keep the keynotes for last. It's a good trick of conference organizing. End with a bang, so we will do that. When we were setting up this conference, we discussed who we would want to invite as keynote speakers, obviously. And because of the theme of the conference, Discourse Theory Ways Forward, we decided to invite speakers who are not part of the discourse theory crowd, if that exists. Instead, we opted quite consciously for keynote speakers who are close to and sympathetic to discourse theory in some ways, but also outside of it and critical of it in other ways. People who are able to bring a particular perspective to the present and future of discourse theory, perhaps also the past of discourse theory, who knows, based on their own background and experience. Also, we wanted to invite nice people. Really, this was we had a discussion about this. Let's invite nice people. Yeah, let's invite nice people. It's just much nicer to have nice people. It's a lot nicer. And I'm sure you noticed during the conference that they're actually nice people. So at least that we did very well, I think. So I'm very pleased that the two nice people called Ruth Wodak and Freeden agreed to speak to us today. Two such prominent speakers, each at the very top of their fields: critical discourse analysis, critical discourse studies, and the study of political ideologies, respectively. Two speakers who can speak to us about their ideas on discourse theory from the vantage point of two fields that are close to discourse theory in different ways. And we are, of course, also interested to know how Ruth and Michael have been inspired by discourse theoretical works or elements of it, perhaps even during this conference. So this is the idea of today. I don't think Ruth or Michael require a lot of introduction, but as usual, that disclaimer is the start of a very long introduction. Interesting, no? People always say, I don't think they require a lot of introduction, and then they just do it. Why is that? Anyway, so I will do the same. Ruth Wodak is an emeritus distinguished professor, that's a long thing, and chair in discourse studies at Lancaster University, and also professor of linguistics in her hometown at the University of Vienna. She has held visiting positions at a very long list of universities and has received many prizes, including the Wittgenstein Prize. This is the highest the highest Austrian science award, and recently also a lifetime award from the Austrian Ministry for Women, Families and Youth. And she's also a very well-known public intellectual in Austria and beyond. One that is not such a great fan of the current Austrian government that you might have guessed as much. Ruth has published widely on a wide range of topics, but she's probably best known for two things, I think. First of all, for having initiated the discourse historical approach to critical discourse analysis at the University of Vienna with some other colleagues. And secondly, for her work on nationalism and right-wing extremism, developed in books such as The Haider Phenomenon, The Discursive Construction of National Identity, a personal favorite of mine, and The Politics of Fear. Ruth has also been involved in some of the major journals in the field of critical discourse studies, including Discourse in Society, Critical Discourse Studies, and the Journal of Language and Politics. And I think especially the last two have also been quite open to the kind of work most of us, or many of us, are doing here today. So Ruth, thank you very much for being here. It has been a pleasure to have you around so far. We'll have to see how pleasant the critical and constructive engagement with discourse theory will be, but at the very least it will be interesting, I am sure. Our second keynote speaker is Michael Freeden, who is currently a professorial research associate at the Department of Politics and International Studies of the University of London. I hope that is correct.
Emeritus at Oxford.
That's coming. I wasn't done yet. I'm just going to check each element. No. He is also emeritus. He is also emeritus professorial fellow at Mansfield College in Oxford.
Perfect.
And was a professor of political theory at the University of Nottingham. Like Ruth Wodak, Michael Freeden is also probably best known for two things. One, in a way, in this case, a theoretical approach to what is politics, how does it work, how should we study it. Ruth is also a theoretical, but also a methodological approach, but also an expert in a specific field. In the case of Ruth Wodak, that was nationalism, the radical right. In the case of Michael Freeden, that is probably liberalism, I would say. So Michael is a major theorist of ideology in general, and a very prominent student of liberalism more particular. He has defined ideologies as semantic fields with certain core concepts and with surrounding concepts whose meanings depend on the core concept. If some of you think, oh, nodal point, that is not a coincidence. I don't think these two approaches to ideology, that this approach to ideology feels quite familiar to some of us, is quite close to discourse theory in certain ways, is also different in other ways, but has certainly been an inspiration to many of us, and I'm also speaking for myself here. Due to, this is what I wrote it, due to its clarity and its immense heuristic value, I think this is an important point. Michael is also, of course, the founding editor of the Journal of Political Ideologies, which is also a major reference point for many of us here. His books on ideology include Ideology, a very short introduction, which is very good but very short, Taking Ideology Seriously, 21st Century Reconfigurations, and The Political Theory of Political Thinking and the Anatomy of a Practice, which was published in 2013. Some of the books on liberalism include Liberal Languages, Ideological Imaginations and 20th Century Progressive Thought, and Liberalism, a very short introduction, 2015. So, we asked Ruth and Michael to prepare a talk on discourse theory ways forward, based on their own expertise and from their positions that are at least partly sympathetic to discourse theory, but also outside of it and critical of it in some way. So this was the explicit request. And perhaps this is not very common in conferences to end with inviting criticism to some extent. So, it's perhaps not the most common way to end a conference, but we found it fitting for a conference called Discourse Theory Ways Forward, because I think we can learn very much from the both of you, and also because the dialogue between discourse theory, critical discourse analysis, and the study of ideology is, of course, very obvious, very necessary, happens to some extent, might perhaps need to happen more. This is what we will see. So Ruth and Michael, I think I speak for everyone in this room when I say that we are very pleased to have you here today, and we hear your ideas on ways forward for discourse theory. You have 25 minutes each, back to back. Not literally back to back, right? But back to back. And then we will have time for discussion. We do have to end kind of on time, not kind of. We really have to do end on time because both of our keynote speakers have to have planes and trains to catch. I'm just supposing that one of Ruth's arguments might be that some discourse theoretical work needs to do some more nitty-gritty empirical work, and that it needs to start more from empirics rather than theory. So let's put that advice into practice, and I would like to invite you, Ruth, to start with your keynote. Thank you very much.